Well, I wrote that I received the manuscript from Vittorio just because I wanted to pretend for the moment that Vittorio was real and the vampires were real, and that this had been something that I had received from him. It was just a very minor little conceit, actually. Yeah, I didn't mean it to have huge implications. Actually, a trip to Florence is what caused me to write Vittorio. I had finished The Vampire Armand, the manuscript for that novel, and I went off to Florence and came back just in love with Florence and Tuscany and everything that I had seen, and immediately sat down and wrote Vittorio the Vampire to use all of that material. It was my response, it was my love letter to Florence. And the novel just poured out. And it's always been a rather special novel because in it, Vittorio makes a reference to Lestat and the other vampires, not by name. He just refers to the Coven of the Articulate, which is what Lestat and his friends have been called in their world. But the characters of Lestat, Marius, Armand, etc., they're not in the novel. The novel Vittorio is really about him and his particular world, and it's a very gothic novel. You know, it's very dark, and it contains, I had a wonderful time telling dark stories. The story of this strange group of vampires who imprison Vittorio and try to hurt him, and angels are in the novel, and the angels behave in a rather strange way. When I was writing about them, I wanted to make clear that they're really not of this earth. And when they try to operate too independently, they can mess up. You know, they don't have the cunning that human beings have. They have a purity that has a price. They lack savvy. And so they're kind of ambiguous figures in the novel. They're certainly good figures, but they're also capable of violence. And they're capable of getting angry. It was an early idea of what I had, an early idea of mine as to what angels were. Later, when I wrote Angel Time and Of Love and Evil, I had a much different idea of what angels were. But anyway, Vittorio is to me a very special novel because it let me do all those gothic horror things I wanted to do. And I would love to see it made into a film someday. It's really one of the Vampire Chronicles, even though the characters aren't in it. And I hope that if some producer does make the Vampire Chronicles into movies, Vittorio will be, you know, one of those movies. I don't know that I ever fell in love with Vittorio. I loved him, certainly, and I loved being him. And I was writing from his point of view, and I was right there with him in his suffering. But I don't think I got as deep into him as I did with so many other characters. I think in the cosmology of the Vampire Chronicles, the young ones are physically weaker than the old ones. The idea I developed was that the older you are as a vampire, the stronger you get, the more resilient, the more powerful, the more able to do very unusual things like defy gravity and fly, um, and the more you hear other people's thoughts, so much so that you have a hard time shutting out the thoughts of other people. And Vittorio was weaker. It was fun to write about a character that really wasn't that strong yet. When you make a character too strong, when he's completely invulnerable physically, when he can fly anywhere in the world, when he can hear everybody's thoughts at all times, it becomes really difficult to work with that character. He doesn't have enough interesting limitations. I mean, we have to remember that everything we're writing is read by human beings. You know, we're writing for human beings, and we have distinct limitations. So any idea we have of tragedy or depth or scope or moral morality or the moral dilemma, these are human concepts. And when this character becomes as inhuman as Lestat became by the end of the Chronicles, it becomes very awkward. It becomes harder and harder to use him in meaningful situations. Well, Vittorio was a more flexible character with maybe more possibilities. But one of the problems with the Chronicles that I confronted was that I was telling the story over and over again of what it means to be made a vampire. And I told that story again with Vittorio. I told it with Pandora. told it with Armand. And each time I would get something completely new out of it, but I also had a longing to move on to something else. So I did need to break away from the Chronicles. That's why I wanted Vittorio. I wanted to be unencumbered by the Vampire Chronicles, unencumbered by all of it, so that I could explore this character in a fresh way. I felt the book was finished at the end, you know, when the angels told him what they had done to him, you know. I mean, I felt he's out there, like all these characters are out there for me. You know, they're all out there in the world, and they continue. I like to end the books in that way because I think that's what our experience of most people is in this world. Yeah. We do, as we get older, we lose more and more witnesses, and we do experience death and loss, but a lot of the times we simply move away from our involvement with characters.